From the Hype HQ studio in Chicago, Illinois, it's Startup Hype Man, the podcast. Hello, everyone. My name is Raj Nation, and I am the founder of Startup Hype Man. Fast-growing startups work with me because they want to become better storytellers. Whether that's for customers, investors, or a packed audience, they know that story is their ticket to stand out, stand apart, and change the game. And this podcast here is where I talk with entrepreneurs and leaders in the startup ecosystem, ranging from scale stage to early stage, as they share specific strategies that they have executed to stand out across three specific areas: sales, marketing, and people. Before we begin today's episode, remember you can head to startuphypeman.com and subscribe to the newsletter that doesn't suck. You'll get new podcast episodes and timely reads written by me, but also helpful articles from around the web and a notice of upcoming pitch competitions. All right, let's dive in and hear how today's guest is changing the game. Ladies and gentlemen, making her way to the microphone from Kollam, Kerala, India, and currently residing in Chicago, Illinois, in the USA. She is the CTO and co-founder of Menerva Software. Please welcome Geetha Ramaswamy. Welcome to the show, Geetha.
Thank you, Raj. How are you today?
I'm good. Are you starstruck by that introduction?
Oh, I'm enjoying this. Yes. Thank you.
She is Geetha Ramaswamy, the co-founder, CTO of Menerva Software. Menerva builds custom SaaS products for small and medium-sized businesses centered around data so that they can make better decisions as organizations. They are a bootstrapped company, 3.5 years in business. They've grown to 24 employees across Chicago, across Cochin in Kerala, India, as well as on the West Coast with an advisor, even in the UK. Geetha, our topic today is using proof of value to unlock new verticals. Can you let our listeners know why this is on your mind and why it's important to you?
Absolutely. So there are two parts to this. The first one is, I'd like to talk about, proof of value and then go into why this is important, right? So traditionally, we've always had proof of concept. So proof of value is something that's come along probably in the last decade or last few years, where people have started focusing on it a bit more. While proof of concept traditionally focused on, proving out a particular concept or technology and seeing how it applies to a particular business, proof of value actually, forces you to stop thinking about the journey and instead focus on the destination. So on the end result, like, what does it mean to apply a concept or a technology, and does it actually matter to me? Does it actually solve a pain point or an existing problem that I have, which means that I do have a need for it, rather than it's a nice to have and it's classified as a want. So proof of value by itself is so important when we are developing products, because if there is no market need, there is no product, essentially. So this is important to us because when we are building B2B SaaS products, for us to make sure that the product enjoys something more than just shelf life, it has to live, it has to exist, and it can exist if and only if there is a market need driving it. And the proof of value will prove that, yes, there is a need for it, and therefore it will thrive.
We're going to dive all into that, not only the more further exploration into the proof of value concept, but proof of value as a concept, but then also how to expand and unlock new verticals with that strategy, as Menerva is embarking on at this moment. One caveat I'll let everyone know is that this is another work from home edition of this show. So you might get random background noise. You might get a baby crying in the unit next door. You might get construction. I don't know. But bear with us as we brave the work from home environment and challenge. So Geetha, before we dive into our primary topic further, let's learn a little bit more about who you are and your own background. I was doing some research on you, and I noticed we have something in common in that we are both yoga teachers in addition to being business people. So on that note, I'm curious to know, where'd you do your training, and how, if at all, do you feel yoga applies to your business life?
Absolutely. I did my training here at the Chicago Yoga Center. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
Sudha was my yoga master. He's phenomenal. And how does it apply to Menerva is that it helps bring a lot of Zen and, karma at the end. All you can do is all you can do. And you keep doing the right thing and results will come along. You want to make sure that you're making progress, and you are going to get very overwhelmed and vulnerable, as you mentioned in your own TED talk, but that is progress, right? And not being so stressed about, all right, am I going to make it? So I think that grounding aspect, I really, really am grateful for knowing at least a little bit about yoga. Of course, every day is is a learning by itself.
One thing I will say that yoga has helped me with is, as a business owner, is specific to the current times. When the pandemic hit, there was a lot of freaking out and overreaction, which I'm not going to fault anyone for doing that because it's the first time it's ever happened in anyone's life.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like if you practice yoga regularly, and if you really are fully bought into the principles and concepts and you've embodied them yourself, it has allowed me anyway to have a better mindset about everything, and really down to the fundamental aspect of just knowing you can breathe through something,
right,
to help figure it out, to help clear your head, and just to feel centered amidst chaos. Have you felt similarly over the past couple months?
I am by nature. I used to get very, very anxious. I still, I would say that there are times when I do, but I think the deep breathing definitely helps. And you're right. Over the next couple of months, I did feel that. But I would say, Raj, over the past few years, it's become a little better. It could also be age, but
I mean, yeah, that definitely plays a factor too. Experience helps.
Right? You're like, okay, you know what? The sky is not yet crashing on our heads, so we'll even this will pass.
Well, let's talk about how you got into the CTO role at Menerva. Can you walk us through your path to into technology and how you started Menerva?
Absolutely. So, so I did my master's here at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Graduated in '98, and after that, I worked
Literally
at
2 blocks down the street from me, by the way.
really.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So yes, after that, worked at AT&T until 2011, and uh, if I have to define myself as to how what I enjoy the most in my career is being hands-on. I love applying technologies to solve actual customer problems, because to me that's the best way you can really understand that particular technology. Otherwise, it's all academic. And think about it. How much of your calculus from your math class in high school or college do you remember? I didn't. I think I forgot it probably 6 months after I graduated. But out of sight, out of mind, right? But with technologies, I think the more we apply to solving actual customer problems, you retain them and you know how best to apply them. So I enjoy doing that. And at AT&T definitely had a lot of good opportunities to do that. And after AT&T in 2011, I joined a company called Geetha, which was a much smaller company, but very interesting and great team to work with. And there also, I had the opportunity to work with data. That's where I first learned about big data, about this wonderful thing called Hadoop, and about data analytics products, right? Where you're doing both data warehousing as well as data analytics, under one roof. All this was pretty exciting. So in 2016, I I decided to take all that knowledge, and basically I felt there is a need in the market to start implementing some of these products little by little, rather than trying to build a rocket ship overnight. You start building pieces of it in an iterative manner, and then do course corrections and validations along the way, and then build something phenomenal, right? So that was the motivation for me to start Menerva. And coincidentally, at that time, my best friend Sony Gabriel, who is one of my co-founders, who is one of the co-founders of Menerva as well, was also thinking along these same lines. So I think it was a great opportunity to start Menerva with him. And along the way, 2 years ago, we also had another friend of ours. Again, all three of us went to school together. We graduated together in 1995 from the University of Kerala, from the computer science and engineering batch.
With that sort of backdrop and getting into Menerva, I introduced the company earlier in our conversation here as one that builds custom SaaS products for small and medium-sized businesses, specifically related to data, so that those companies can make better decisions as an organization. Help steer us from there. That's just a quick explanation, but help fill in some detail there. And I'd also love to know how you came up with the name.
Okay, sure. I'd love to. I'll start with the name, because Menerva is actually the Etruscan goddess of art, wisdom, and knowledge. So it's not Minerva. Minerva is the Italian equivalent. Minerva is actually is older.
Minerva is the Roman version of Athena, right?
Yes. So, but Minerva was apparently a predecessor, or someone who is more senior. Let's just put it that way. So since we are a data analytics company, right, we felt that the wisdom and knowledge aspect of it was very powerful. And then, of course, the feminine component, right? So we felt it's very empowering. But then I did make a compromise. That's why it's MEN, Minerva, So
No, that's a really cool backstory to the company name. So let us know then, give us more information or detail on what the company does.
Yeah. So what we do is essentially our sweet spot is working with small to medium businesses, as I've mentioned. So most of these companies, they employ a cocktail of applications to execute their workflows. So for instance, they may be using Google Docs, they may be using HubSpot, they may be using, a slew of other applications as well to execute their day-to-day workflows. We know that a lot of them can be manual. Again, some of these applications can be very expensive, not only to use, but also to set up. So you need specially skilled admins and so on. So as a result, what happens is you have silos of data even within your own organization. So when you have to make an educated decision about something, the best the companies make is an educated guess. It's, you're not basing it off of data at your fingertips. You think it is, but it's not always the case. So, and again, data can tell you a different story. And as humans, we're also biased towards, okay, we know for sure that this thing works, but when you actually look at the numbers, it might be different. So what we try to do is we take these workflows and we are able to put them all under one roof. And that's where, this custom SaaS application works very well. So for instance, if this particular company or client that we are working with, they themselves have 10 to 20 clients, you can imagine the amount of manual work that their employees have to go through to execute business for their clients, right? So there's a lot of doing that happens without actually thinking about, okay, how can I make this more productive? How do I scale better, right? And how do I focus more on my clients' business value rather than just executing all the to-dos or tasks to help them function. So that was one motivation. So to get all the data under one roof, that's one. And as a result, when you do that, you automatically have all of the data that you need at your fingertips, and thereby you can drive your daily decisions in an ongoing manner.
Let's dive deeper now into our primary topic today, which is using proof of value to unlock new verticals. Now, you mentioned earlier the main difference between a proof of concept and a proof of value, and you defined proof of value as really being like destination focused with some key results that are identified up front.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we think of proof of value versus proof of concept, is that really just a matter of nomenclature? Because I would imagine people who are doing proofs of concept, they want to achieve results too. Are you saying, though, more so that proof of concept does not have to have any objectives and it's kind of more of an exploration? Is that correct? Or did I get that wrong?
No, it is correct. And the thing is, sometimes it's also construed as a marketing term, but it is not when you actually think about it. So even if you look at the words, right? Proof of concept, you're proving a concept. Proof of technology, you're proving a technology or a concept. Hey, does it work?
Yeah, does it work? Yeah, that's what I was just thinking as you said that. Does it work is kind of the key question.
Right. And the proof of value is, does it work for me? Right? It may work, yes. It may be solving world hunger, but does it solve hunger for me? Sorry, cliched, but
yeah. Yeah, I get it. Does it put food on my table? Not does it solve hunger in general. Does it put food on my table?
Right.
With that understanding, let's talk about how Menerva is leveraging this idea of proof of value in order to not just acquire new customers, but expand into new verticals. So first, walk us through who sort of like what are the qualities of the existing customer set, and then what is the new verticals that you're expanding into?
Okay. So we currently are familiar with 4 industry verticals. So let me start there. Healthcare, social media, retail, and fintech. We are strong believers in the fact, Raj, that just having technology experience or being able to work with a lot of technologies, while that is important, it's not as important as the domain knowledge that you should have. Because data by itself is data. Again, it's numbers, but different numbers can mean different things to different domains, right? So what we try to do is we try to make sure that we have the domain knowledge, and we are confident about these, at least healthcare and fintech. Like I said, our advisors, they have been in the fintech space, and Sunil, the third co-founder, he's very experienced in the healthcare space. So when you know a bit more about the domain, you also know that, okay, here are some of the pain points that keep coming up again and again for these customers. And so, hey, it might be a good idea to build something that people will actually use, right? Of course, there's also the other school of thought, where it's always fun to build something even if people don't need anything when it comes to technology. It's just so gratifying to build something, right? But unfortunately, there is time, effort, money, all that. Those things don't work very well, right? So we are very particular that when we embark on a particular problem and when we are trying to solve it, especially if this is something that we are originating from within Menerva, we want to make sure, yes, this will sell, or this makes sense, right? So that's been, looking at our current verticals and then looking at our domain knowledge and saying, yes, there is, for instance, this operational pain point that we keep running into, that all financial institutions are running into. And so it makes sense to build something that will actually help them out. So when we start addressing and truly helping the pain points and illustrating that with our beta customers, then we gain their trust and credibility, and we have the opportunity to add actual business value. And then we know then the money and fame and all that will follow itself, right? But if you're focused on the ladder, unfortunately, we may just crash and burn, right?
Sure.
So that's been one approach that we do.
So with one more time, the existing verticals were social media and say the other ones again.
Social media, retail, fintech, and healthcare.
social media, retail, fintech, and healthcare. So that's
Right.
the base. Now, when we think about expanding into new verticals,
Mhm.
what have you, at least thus far, defined as the next expansion points, and why choose those as opposed to choosing, what you're not choosing?
Right. So I think the there is a criteria internally that we look at before we expand into another vertical, which is that either one of us has, we need to have a domain expert on board. So I will say that social media was not one of the verticals where any of us had expertise in, but after we started working with a client who is who is a great expert on social media, we were able to work with them closely and understand that vertical much more. So the criterion is, for us, in some cases we meet a customer or a contact where they bring in the domain knowledge and they look at what we have been doing in the other verticals. And we also have a few demo applications, data analytics applications, that we try to demonstrate to all our prospects so that they get a flair for, okay, this is how we think and this is what we build and this is what we can do for them, right? So sometimes they look at that and they realize that we could do something, again, something useful. We could generate something useful from this, and then we go from there. So that's our other segue into new verticals.
Got it. So it sounds like it's still very much a customer-led process.
Yes.
You're not just throwing things at the wall and seeing what works.
Very customer centric. That's we try to be that all the time.
Yeah, good. Which is, I think that's a fantastic strategy, and companies should operate in that manner. What does a proof of value look like specific to your company? So if you identify a new vertical and, let's kind of just walk us through an example of one vertical you're expanding into and how you determine proof of value and how do you slide it into your sales process? Because I don't think it's as easy as just emailing people being like, hey, we'll do this thing. We'll do a 10-week pilot for you. Because people are like, I don't have time for that, right? So kind of walk us through vertical, how you decide the proof of value project, and how you insert it into the sales process.
Okay, so in our past conversation, right, Raj, I had mentioned to you that we are building MVPs of two products that we are looking to launch in the next couple of weeks. One of them is targeting financial institutions where we are going to be helping them mitigate losses by basically allowing them to predict their loss over the upcoming months due to delinquencies. So basically predict delinquencies that are bound to happen using third-party data sources, internal data sources, credit bureau sources, and so on and so forth. So that's one. Another example is we have seen a case where business users are challenged with using models that have been created to them by their data analyst teams. So in that case, how can they reuse data models that have been created, where sometimes they just have to execute them using new data, or they may just have to retrain that model without actually being dependent on their data analyst to do so. So it's a portal for that. So in both of these cases, what we are looking at is, first of all, we are trying to identify who would be our best beta customers. So for instance, instead of just opening up and say, hey, everybody just come in, here's what we have, I don't think anybody is going to sign up. But if you are targeted and if you really go after the contacts who will actually benefit from it, then we feel that they will be a great beta customer base. And our proposition is that we'll have an extended trial period where they can, no obligations, they can actually try out the product. And during that time, we are very confident that we can illustrate proof of value. So some of the metrics that we use to measure whether we are or how effective we are in illustrating proof of value is, for one, how soon can we get the application up and running in their environment? Second, how much of it is automated and scaled so that they start seeing results much sooner than, so it's not us telling them, hey, look, it'll take us 6 weeks to customize this for you, then, warning bells go in. So if we are talking about proof of value, then we must be ready to, have the application up and running quickly, automate, scale everything at the onset, and not, after a few weeks.
I want to ask you about some of those like parameters you put around launching the proof of value. But before I do that, I want to stop and let our listeners know about a new partner of the show in Sales Hacker. So if you're a longtime listener here, then not only because you've been listening, because I've been doing this read for a long time now, that I try to feature more B2B startups on the show, like Menerva is, or maybe startups that are marketplace with a B2B angle to them. And Sales Hacker is the world's smartest community for forward-thinking B2B professionals. It is 135,000 members deep, which means if you're a CEO, a head of sales, a sales rep, or even a marketing person, Sales Hacker is going to help you get better at your job with things like podcasts, articles, webinars, and research from actual sales practitioners and experts, including yours truly. Every now and then I'm contributing to Sales Hacker as well. It's no fluff from outside content marketers. It's just a straight dope to grow your sales acumen. I'm a big fan of the Sales Hacker community and the people over there. I love what they're doing, and I'm so excited to have them as a partner of this podcast now. If you want to get involved with Sales Hacker, it's simple. Go to saleshacker.com. Easy URL, saleshacker.com. Just enter your email address, and you can access the entire community for free. Plus, they've also got a lot on their website without even having to give your email address. But if you give your email, then you'll get tailored content in your inbox. Again, it is saleshacker.com to get access to the articles, the research, and more. One more time, that's saleshacker.com. Today on Startup Hype Man, the podcast, we're with Geetha Ramaswamy, the CTO and co-founder of Menerva Software, talking using proof of value to unlock new verticals. Now, Geetha, I want to ask you about this parameters that you have to put around proof of value. So you can talk with the potential customer around and define like what are the shared metrics and objectives here, and what equals success and results. But how do you put a window around that? And really what's driving my question is, how do you do this in a way where they're not taking advantage of your free labor and the product you've developed?
That's a good question. So before we engage in any type of agreement or anything, right? The first thing that we do is we write it down, and we say, okay, here is what we are going to do here, and that way it's all on paper, and this way it also helps us meet expectations, and there are no surprises after the implementation is done. So that's one way, So for instance, with if I look at the AI workbench, we would basically say, let's start with 5 models that you're looking to use from within the application. So anything more than that would be something that we'll have to consider. And in some cases, if these are all very, depending on how complex they are and how how not easy to implement, how much of resources they will need to execute. We could say that, okay, if there are 5 average models, then that's what average size models, then that's what we will propose. But if they are really very small models, then maybe we could go to 8 or 10. So it's basically evaluating and then ensuring that, okay, these are the number of hours that we have bucketed to as part of this freemium setup. Now, if anything goes beyond that, then we'll have to talk. But chances are that I think if we communicate openly and we explain that this is basically what it is, because sometimes customers, I think, don't know what is easy to do and not. And in that case, I think having that conversation with them and at the end of the day, it has to be a win-win too.
So it comes down to clearly defining what the scope is up front. Just as you would do at the end of a sales process, you're doing this for the proof of value at the beginning.
Absolutely. Yes.
Now, how do you ensure then that it is a successful experiment or a successful project, and you do prove the value and not turn into a failed experiment?
Because we are going to articulate what it is exactly that we will do at the beginning before we start. So we tell them, this is what you're going to see. This is what you will get at the end. And that's basically our criteria for success. So if we didn't meet that, then I don't know what we were thinking when we were writing that. So that's and that's part of our process today. Even when we build B2B products for our other customers, we believe in a specification process where we're not trying to be pedantic, but we do write down, this is exactly what we are building. So there are no surprises, and it helps in just plain English, so that all of us can read, the development, the product managers, the clients, and everyone.
So I guess then, let me ask that in a different way, because that makes sense, right? You say, here's what we're going to do, and then you prove the thing that you said you were going to do. But how do you do that while, because I think there's like a very easy, oh, we're going to do this, but the what you did is actually not that much, right? So how do you get to that point of being like, okay, at this level, that's what we believe, that's when we believe value has been achieved, versus not doing enough or doing too much?
We should be able to quantify that too, for sure, Raj. Within a certain number of days, you would have been able to run so many iterations of the model. When you retrained it, you should be able to download so many results or just execute it, and so on and so forth. And that would be, and if that is true value for them, then they would probably commit to it at the beginning. That's our assumption. But if they don't commit to it, then we know that, okay, they're probably not very interested in being a beta customer, because obviously, it's not working out for them.
Do you have situations where you say, here's what we believe value is, and they say, actually, we think it's a little bit more than that, and then you modify to come to like a middle ground?
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, I think it's the pain point is on the customer's side. So what can we do to make them shine? And that goes without saying. However, what does it mean to make them shine? If it's a complete revamp of what we are doing, and if it's impossible to do it within a certain time frame, I think it's better to come clean, and that's what we do all the time, because you can't build something overnight, and that's not the point. So
right.
Yeah.
Right. Do proof of values have to be free? Can they be paid?
They can be paid, but I think when it comes to a brand new product, I think it's a fine line, Raj, because you also want to make sure you get good feedback or critical feedback. And if you sometimes, when you pin a cost to it, at least in the initial stages with your first 1 or 2 or 3 beta customers, when you pin a cost to it, then you may run into the risk of no one ever wanting to come near your product. So I think you are, even though you may not be getting dollars, you're still getting critical feedback, and that is necessary for your product to grow and get validated.
Now, having said that, if it's free, how do you ensure, and maybe it's through communication, maybe it's through scope agreement up front, but generally speaking, when things are free, just in life, we tend to pay less attention to, like, oh yeah, I'll take that. Like, for example, as a yoga instructor, I have like 5 free gym memberships, but I only really use one of them, right? And I $400 in monthly gym memberships just like comes to me every month, but I don't use $400, right? So how do you ensure that doesn't happen, where it's like, oh, it's this free thing that's happening on the customer side? They're not saying, yeah, it's this free thing we're doing, we'll see what they come up with. Because I feel like they have to have input and an active involvement for it to truly be successful, right?
Right. So that's where, although I say it's free, it's a freemium model, right? So we are looking to, we are saying no obligations for the first 60 days, for instance, right? So during that 60 days, they could try out the product, and of course we would be following up with them closely. So it's not, we install it and we say, so long, we'll see you in 60 days. No, I don't think that will go anywhere. So we have to, when we have the initial agreement, we'll write down the expectations, like the checkpoints, and And we are always there because we want them to use it, because it's in them using it that we can also demonstrate our value, and they also get the benefit from signing this up with us. So what we are proposing is, it's not free till the end of time, but it's free for a certain time period.
Sure.
During which we could enhance the product, or we can see how things pan out, and then in 60 days that's when we start they have an option to either purchase it or not.
And that comes back to the parameters you talked about earlier.
Yes.
During that 60-day window, at what point do you come back to them? Like, let's say it's going well.
Mm-hmm.
And presumably so, if you're able to do it over and over again. I would assume the failure rate is much lower, and you're hedging your bets here in your favor. At what point in that 60-day proof of value timeline do you reach out to them to say, let's talk about what this looks like beyond 60 days and get like a long-term agreement together? Or do you wait until the 60 days are up to have that conversation?
No, I think once we reach between the 30 days and the 60 days mark, right? If we are having productive conversations for the first 30 days, we know things are going well, or we should know pretty soon that this is going downhill or uphill, So anyway, so I think at that point we can gauge the customer sentiment and whether they'll proceed with it or not. Or we, it may be a moment where we look at things and say, hey, you know what, this probably is, there are things that we have to adapt and update in here before we can actually go ahead and let the customer know. So we try very hard to look at it from the customer standpoint to ensure that, okay, if we are making a proposition, it's actually going to benefit them. Because the last thing we want is, sell the customer something and then, which they are not keen on purchasing. And then, those things never last that long, right? It's better to go in strong and make an impact and ensure that, they're really happy with, what you're delivering. So I think those conversations will start earlier. I mean, there's no need to beat about the bush, but I think it's productive to raise that ahead of time and see how things are going, and if this is something that they'll be keen on pursuing.
So it sounds like even though you've got a 60-day window on this, you've got it structured in a way where they're probably, if they're going to see value, they're probably going to see value, like say around the 30-day mark.
Absolutely.
Which then allows them to get basically an extra month of value for where you can say, hey, let's continue the momentum, as opposed to you're not structuring it in a way where it's a 60-day window and they're supposed to see first value on day 59.
Right.
Okay.
Yep,
yeah. And I think that makes sense because, I feel like people could hear this and be like, well, that's the same as a free trial. But I really think a free trial is more often than not done in such a passive manner. And you might have some like automated emails to bump people through and be like, have you used this yet? But it's still passive because you automated that part and you're not necessarily working on a shared goal. You're saying, here's the thing, use it if you want it for a little bit of time. And we don't even necessarily know what your specific use case is.
Yes. The difference in here is that we hold the customer's hands in ensuring that they are able to find the value, and we have checkpoints to ensure that it's not as passive as as the free trials that happen with consumer applications, right? Because, for instance, I may download WinZip and I have a trial for 14 days, and then I can convert that into a subscription. But this is not like that, because we want to make sure that the product does illustrate value, actual value to the customer. And if not, we want to know why it did not work out and what is it that we should change so that next time it does work for them, right? And that's our criteria. We want to be successful. And if it was not successful, there probably was a reason. as to why it wasn't successful, barring everything else, like budgets and things of that nature.
Right. I have one more question before we begin our wrap up. Generally speaking, at what point do you feel it makes sense for a company to expand into a new vertical versus just focusing in and going deep within one vertical?
Usually expanding into new verticals, Raj, I found that to be more of a brownfield expansion. It's not necessarily because there's so many products out there and pain points and the like, and there are lots of companies trying to solve the same problem differently, right? So so expanding into a new vertical, like I said, one of the things that is a must is having a domain expert. I think someone who knows the domain will be able to champion the product like no one else can. So we are very big on that. So it might be a client coming and saying, look, I want to build this and this is what I know. Then we learn from them and we work with them very closely to ensure that, okay, we can actually realize their vision. And that's worked out for us in the past. So that's one. The second one is when it comes to delving more into an existing vertical, to us, that needs to happen, or that can happen if and only if we have a customer validation of at least the basic version, because that's important. Because it's like you have a great product, but if you keep enhancing it without any outside input, you're like a frog in a well. You really don't know what you're building, and what you generate. It may be a great thing, but no one may care about it, right? So I think that's the criterion before delving more and more into a vertical, and that's what we are doing with our MVPs that we have generated. We are in a position where we think we have a good pain point to address, but the thing is, we also have to validate it with a customer and ensure that it makes sense. And then with their feedback, we'll continue to enhance it even more and make it better.
Where can our listeners find you online and learn more about the company?
The first place would be our website, so menervasoftware.com. And the second place is LinkedIn. You can follow me or follow Menerva Software or follow my co-founder, Sony Gabriel.
Great. Given our conversation today, to do our wrap up, let's give our top one or two lessons or takeaways for the listeners based on this discussion. I'll go first and then I'll hand it off to you. To me, I think the biggest things that came out of this conversation were if you're going to use proof of value in your strategy for, I don't think not just new vertical expansion, but just in general customer acquisition, you've got to really take the time to understand your body. Like it's almost like what companies treat as traditional discovery. It's like you're doing that, but then also in the context of how can we create something for you, or how do we take what we have for you and make sure that your goals can be hit right away, as opposed to in a sales process, it's like all the questions you're asking and the conversations you're having are for when a future contract is signed and money is paid, then we can do these things. The other thing that I think is important here is that this strategy, and you tell me if you disagree, but this strategy makes a lot of sense for some companies and doesn't make sense for a lot of other companies. And I think the one that doesn't make sense for is if you have a low ticket offering that has high volume. So if you're selling like $100 a month product, probably, or less than that, it probably doesn't make sense to get into these like deep level proof of value conversations. But if you're working for thousands and multiple thousands of dollars in a contract per month, that's where this holds a lot of weight and merit. Geetha, your top one or two takeaways from our discussion today?
Yes, the top one or two is, the first one is, I think at the intersection of data, domain knowledge, and pain points, there are plenty of opportunities, right? And plenty of ways to add value. And I completely agree with, what you said about those, low ticket items and the high effort, very costly to build type of implementations. So like I said, although there are plenty of opportunities, the key takeaway is nothing replaces execution. So, if you take a line from John Doerr's quote, he says, ideas are easy, but execution is everything, and it takes a team to win, right? So true proof of value can be provided if you execute well and think from the customer standpoint and deliver as a result.
My final question, fill in the blank. Entrepreneurship is blank.
It's about identifying a real business need and the ability to add tremendous value to a customer by building the right solution.
Identifying a real business need and providing tremendous value to the customer. She is Geetha Ramaswamy. She is the co-founder and CTO of Menerva Software. Geetha, thank you so much for joining me today on Startup Hype Man, the podcast.
Thank you so much, Raj, for having me.
That wraps up today's conversation. Did you like what you heard? Startup Hype Man, the podcast, is available on every major platform, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and more. So be sure to subscribe on your platform of choice and leave a rating and review. Do you want to be an upcoming guest on the show? Email media@startuphypeman.com with your idea, and my team will review. Our theme song is Change the Game by Jay-Z, all rights owned by Rockefeller and Def Jam Records. And hey, if you want to work together on making your startup story the only one that matters, email me at rajiv@startuphypeman.com. That's RAJIV@startuphypeman.com. Well, that'll do it for today. Thank you for listening. Thank you to today's guests for joining. You have been checking out Startup Hype Man, the podcast. I'll catch you next week. But in the meantime, word up, raise up.